All right, guys, so today what I wanted to do is look at one of my favorite authors, which is Neil Gaiman, and say what I really think are the best entry points for Neil Gaiman. If you're interested in checking out his work, if maybe you've seen American Gods on Amazon Prime, or if you've seen Coraline the movie, or anything like this, or you've heard of him from elsewhere and you want to know where to dig in, this is my personal opinion on where would be good entry points for you. Now, this isn't to say that I think that any one of these are the best books that he has written. I will tell you which ones that I do think are the best. However, that's largely a personal opinion. I haven't read every single Neil Gaiman book. There's a few Neil Gaiman books that I have not read. I haven't read all of his short story collections. I think I read Fragile Things. I haven't read his Norse mythology book. I've only read part of Good Omens. That one didn't hit for me, which will probably give you a little bit of an idea of kind of what my taste is when it does come to Neil Gaiman's writing. And I also haven't read Stardust. And Stardust actually kind of strikes me as a little bit of a different kind of approach to some of his atmosphere and his writing. I tried to watch the movie and again I couldn't get into it, so that might tell you a little bit about where my tastes lie, but in terms of entry points, I don't think that should affect it too much. So the first potential entry point for Neil Gaiman, this is if you're the type of reader who wants a small sample of the author before diving into a larger work to get an idea of how they write, their style, the kind of stories that they like to tell, and just as kind of a little bit of an appetizer, then I'm going to recommend for you The Ocean at the End of the Lane. The Ocean at the End of the Lane, I think, is the last book of Neil Gaiman's that I read. It was one of his more recent ones to be published, and I kind of billed it as an adult version of Coraline, and that's not to say that they're not really the same story, but Coraline is quite a short book. This is quite a short book. It's very bite-sized, it's very digestible, and it has all of kind of Neil Gaiman's mythic trappings. The thing with Ocean at the End of the Lane is there's a darkness to it, and there's a lot of darkness to quite a bit of Neil Gaiman's writing. Some people have billed Neil Gaiman as kind of like a whimsical kind of storyteller, and I don't think that that's quite accurate. I think if you come at Neil Gaiman from, let's say, Stardust or Anansi Boys or something like that, you're going to get a little bit more playfulness out of it. You're going to get a little bit more whimsy. But if you look at a lot of the content in Sandman, a lot of the content in American Gods, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, it gets quite dark. A lot of this is what I enjoy about Neil Gaiman, because he can give you that without being so morose and foreboding about it, but at the same time wrap you in this atmospheric presence around that kind of content that kind of really ties you into the story. It really sucks you into the narrative, and I really enjoy that about his writing. So if you want something that's a little bit more bite-sized, just to see if you like him or not, and you're looking for an adult book, Ocean at the End of the Lane is where I'm going to probably point you. Now, if you're looking to get into a meatier Gaiman book, I'm going to jump right into the novel that I think is his best novel. That's disputable, or debatable, disputable, whatever. It's debatable. But for me, when I read this book, I did not have a lot of experience in the fantasy genre, and there's a lot of strict fantasy readers that will not consider Neil Gaiman kind of fitting into the fantasy genre that well. However, when I read American Gods, I was like, this is what I want out of my fantasy. This is what fantasy could be, and this is the kind of interesting things it could do with the genre. And it's probably his most famous novel outside of maybe Coraline, only because of the movie, but that would be because of the TV series or the Amazon Prime series that got released of American Gods. If you watched the Amazon Prime series, I don't think it's a bad show, but I think it suffers from the Hobbit syndrome, where they took a short book and they tried to make three-hour-long movies out of like a 200-page book with the Hobbit. They tried to make multiple seasons out of one like 600-page book with American Gods, and I think that was kind of a mistake. They try to fill in a lot of that with atmosphere. This is a very episodic book where it's also hard to write the script for something like this, because particularly with TV shows, you want a little bit more of an active protagonist, and the protagonist in this, his name is Shadow Moon. He's kind of very passive. He gets kind of strung along this series of events with these characters that are in the background of some kind of conflict happening with old gods and the new gods of America. And one of the things that I loved about this is there's a little bit of a literary quality to this that asks the question, what happens not just when immigrants come to the country, but what happens to their faith as they bring that to a new place. And then the kind of belief system and culture of that new place kind of consumes their way of life and kind of devours it and tries to overtake those historic traditions, and what happens when those traditions themselves can manifest and fight back, which I thought is a very interesting question to ask. My mom is an immigrant to this country, and there's actually a lot of immigrant angles that aren't usually, I don't think, explored. I really appreciated the Slavic angles from this, obviously my mom being from the Balkans, but they cross a series of pantheons. Some of those might not always be culturally represented with the most accuracy. There's a person I know who had a few gripes with it. That didn't bother me so much, and I know a lot of readers still love the book regardless, despite these things. If you pick those up, they might tarnish the book a little bit for you, but to be honest with you, just as a story, as what Neil Gaiman is able to do, the way he's able to wrap you in the mythology of this book is absolutely exquisite, and I think this is the best that Neil Gaiman has done in novel form. So if you want to dig in and you want to ride the biggest roller coaster in the theme park first, American Gods is where I would go. Now, if you ride the biggest ride in the theme park first, is that going to ruin the rest of the books for you? No, not necessarily. Anansi Boys is a great follow-up to this. It is not a sequel. It takes place in the same universe. Anansi is a character that pops up, and it kind of explores a side story that is completely separate. That doesn't work well as an entry point, I don't think, because I think having this for a little bit of context will help you, unless you already know who Anansi is in mythology, and in that case you could probably dive into Anansi Boys straight away. Definitely a much different vibe than American Gods if you're going to do that. A little bit more, I think, humorous, a little bit lighter, but surprisingly good. A surprisingly good read. Now, if you want to dive into Neil Gaiman in his most raw form, you're going to have to put the novels down. In my personal opinion, I think you're going to go with Sandman, okay, which is the graphic novel series, the comic series that he wrote. I believe there's 10 volumes and a few spin-offs that he did. If you get the all 10 volumes, you're probably going to want to go back and read Overture, which is a separate one that Neil Gaiman wrote many years later that ties the series in exquisitely. Now, given that there are 10 volumes in here and there are multiple comics in each volume, I wasn't a massive fan of every single entry in here, but I wasn't disappointed with any given entry. It's just obviously with so many entries, you're going to love some more than others. Taken together, though, it was my favorite thing from Neil Gaiman that I had read, and it's one of my favorite things that I've read, period. I think this is something that upon first reading is much more impactful than if you reread it. I have reread some of the series and I thoroughly enjoyed it, but the type of atmosphere and, again, mythology that Neil Gaiman ties into this is so... He's so bold in the choices that he makes. He's so... the way he can tie in certain aspects of history and certain mythological characters from different pantheons in this giant overarching story that ties together across so many volumes is really, really impressive. It's dark, it's insightful, it has really a lot of touching moments, a lot of, again, insights that I found really, really hit me. So if you're going to get him at his most raw form, this is the first thing that Gaiman wrote where it really brought him to prominence, so I would definitely recommend starting with Sandman. I can't really speak so much on his children's literature, to be honest with you, but I have read two books that are geared at a younger audience per se, and I can't rate one over the other because they're both phenomenal books. One is Coraline and the other one is The Graveyard Book. Okay, The Graveyard Book I actually think is better. I actually think The Graveyard Book might be one of the best books that Gaiman ever wrote, and that's a strange thing to say, considering I'm saying that I like a lot of his darker work. Gaiman himself said that he tried to write The Graveyard Book several times, and he admitted to himself that he was not a good enough writer to tackle the project and execute it in the way that he wanted. He had to get a lot of projects off of his plate first before he thought he had the capability to really tell the story that he wanted to tell here. And the elevator pitch for this story is as clean as it can be. It's the Jungle Book that takes place in a graveyard instead of the jungle. Great premise, very, very Gaiman-esque if you've read anything else by Neil Gaiman. And I thought this was an exquisite book. I've recommended this for kids of several friends of mine who are getting into like a reading age where they want to start tackling novels. And I really, really enjoyed The Graveyard Book. Surprisingly, like I enjoyed it quite a bit for an adult because I didn't read it until my 20s. But I didn't lose any of the magic for that. So guys, that is how I would tackle Neil Gaiman. If you want something short and digestible to get a taste for him, Ocean at the End of the Lane. If you want his big, chunky, meaty novel that kind of really captures most of what Gaiman tries to do in a lot of his novels, I think American Gods is just a heavy hitter that you got to go with. And if you want him in his most raw form, you got to check out Sandman. Okay, guys? After that, honestly, check out all of his books, but those will give you a good grounding for a lot of other things. I know some people started with Neverwhere because that was his first novel. Neverwhere is a great place to start too. Like, I wouldn't complain about starting from there either. It's just that Neverwhere felt like a warm-up to American Gods. So if you just want to, I felt like if you read Neverwhere and you were disappointed, maybe American Gods could pick it up for you, but maybe just read American Gods first, because Neverwhere isn't disappointing if you read American Gods first. It's familiar, it's fun, it gives you that same Gaiman vibe, just with a little bit of a different context. All right, guys, if you've read Neil Gaiman, if you're a Neil Gaiman fan, let me know. What's your favorite book by Neil Gaiman? Everybody has a different one. I have friends who love Stardust, and I haven't read that one. I can't bring myself to pick it up, but they think I'm crazy for that. And I have other people who can't stand Neil Gaiman. They don't understand why other people love him, and I totally get that too, right? Taste is taste. That's it, guys. I love Neil Gaiman. I love what he does with the genre. I love what he does with the atmosphere, who he is as a writer, and a lot of the stuff that he puts out. If you have any other recommendations that are along the line of Neil Gaiman, please let me know, because I'd love to pick them up. And I will catch you guys on the next video. Wuss.